thanks very much first of all for inviting me. Very pleased to be here. It's my first time actually coming to this meeting, and my first impression was, wow, what an amazing turnout. You know, it's great to see so many people here, and it's really such a great reflection of just Support UK, really. So I'm Carys Morgan. I'm a consultant oncologist in Belinda in Cardiff. I've basically been working in Belinda for about 3 years as a consultant, so I'm relatively new. And my main interest has been upper GI cancers, so mainly I treat patients with cancers of the esophagus, stomach and upper GI tract. And as part of that, I then sort of took over the practice of looking after patients with GIST. So I come at it from a slightly different angle to some other clinicians looking after GIST patients. I don't know, you may find that a lot of oncologists, or your oncologists, may have an interest in sarcoma, but there are some of us who come more from the upper GI side. So that's me, basically. I was asked to do a topic today. I think you've had some fantastic talks earlier about GIST and about mutational analysis, and I've heard all about new developments. So my talk, I was asked to really talk about multidisciplinary team working, which I have to admit took me by surprise slightly. I was sort of expecting more of a talk about GIST. But this is incredibly relevant to all cancer types, and it's really a talk about how we actually work in cancer care in the UK. So I'm trying to make it relevant to GIST, but to be honest, I hope that it's of interest to you, and it's more about how we actually work in cancer. So just to say what I was going to talk about, I was trying to give you a bit of background into what an MDT is, or a multidisciplinary team, talk about what makes up that team and how it works, and then, if possible, show you some of the benefits of MDT working and why we've moved towards that in the UK. I was going to talk a little bit about the evidence that's available to show how MDT working has helped in the UK, and then talk a little bit about the pros and cons of MDT working, because obviously nothing is perfect, as you will see, and then the requirements for that. But obviously, if anyone's got any questions, feel free to ask at any time, stop me waffling on. I have also got a short DVD which is produced by basically a national body, which shows some short videos about how MDT working happens in practice, and if we've got time I might show you a little bit of that later. So, why do we need MDTs? Well, I think over the last 15-20 years cancer care has become increasingly complex. I think that we can all see that most patients with cancer will need much more than just one treatment. Often will need surgery, some form of chemotherapy or drug treatment, possibly radiotherapy, and so that's going to involve a lot of different healthcare professionals. I think there was some evidence once that where they looked at the number of healthcare professionals that one patient will see, and it was in some cases over 50. So that's amazing, and obviously those people really do need to work together to make sure that the cancer pathway for that patient is smooth. Because prior to MDT working, there was certainly a lot of potential for miscommunication between different disciplines in medicine, with the patient and between hospitals basically. And to be honest, if you're looking back to the 1990s, coordination of care through that pathway was poor, to be honest. I hope it's improved. This was just to demonstrate that really prior to MDT working, I think everyone was looking at one piece of the jigsaw, but no one was looking at fitting the pieces together and actually providing a much more holistic picture for the patient. So certainly there was definitely scope to improve. The other things that were apparent in the UK, back really in the early 1990s, was that where you lived really mattered. There was, such a variation in your access to specialist care and to specialist involvement, particularly if you have something like GIST, which is rare. If you lived in mid-Wales or the Outer Hebrides, the chance of you seeing a specialist was pretty minimal. So, that really needed to change. This was leading to sort of frequent complaints about cancer services in different parts of the country just not being up to scratch, really. And patterns of referral, and just delivery of cancer services was very disjointed. And I think this must have had an effect on the outcomes for cancer. So patients with different types of cancer in the UK weren't doing as well as we would like them to. And if we compared outcomes in the UK to other parts of Europe, we would certainly have been lagging behind. So something needed to be done, and the way we work is part of that. So some figures here really showing that back in the mid-90s, less than 20% of patients in England were managed by specialist teams. So say a patient with colon cancer, or a patient with breast cancer, or a patient with pancreatic cancer, they may all be seen and managed by a general surgeon, not one person with a particular interest. And that really has changed massively since then. These days, and this is some data from Leslie Fallowfield, who's got a particular interest in this, over 95% of hospitals are providing specialist cancer services for these common cancers such as lung, breast, bowel cancers. So things have really moved on. At the moment, there's at least 1,500 multidisciplinary teams working in cancer care just in England alone. So things have certainly changed for the better. How did it happen? Well, back in 1995, there was a large report called the Kalmanheim Report, which was the first sort of big comprehensive review of cancer services in the UK. And that was the first thing that really sort of advocated MDT working, or cancer networks. And since then, things have moved on quite a lot. There's been a number of other documents produced by the government, cancer plan and the reform strategy, all of which have very much had multidisciplinary team working at the central part of cancer care, basically. Now, following on from that, for each cancer type, there have been these documents produced called Improving Outcomes. So this is just an example for children and young people with cancer, but they've really been produced for most cancer sites, and they're really evidence-based documents sort of outlining standards that every MDT should be adhering to for those cancer types. And they're used now as a sort of manual of how things should be done that we can compare our own practice to. So all of these, at the centre of them is MDT working, okay? The most recent government document here from the current government basically says that MDT working has led to improved decision making and more coordinated patient care and improvement in quality of care, and it should remain the cornerstone of cancer treatment. So I think that's true, but it is something which we've eventually got to. So that's just a bit of background about how this came about. But actually, what is it? What is an MDT? Well, it stands for a multidisciplinary team, and again, there's a standard, what's the word? Definition, that's it. So it's a group of people of different healthcare disciplines meeting together to discuss a patient, each contributing independently to the diagnostic or the treatment pathway and decisions. So basically, what it is a group of clinicians, not just doctors, often nurses, dietitians, all sorts of people that come together to look at each individual patient with cancer, to come up with hopefully a treatment plan which is going to be ideal for that patient. The patient's views obviously are absolutely vital to this. I'll come on to that later, because the worst situation in an MDT is actually no one has any clue about what the patient thinks. And there has been a big problem with that, as I'll show you later. So who makes up an MDT? It depends very much on the cancer type, really. But in general, you need a medical or a clinical oncologist and a surgeon, because the vast majority of patients with cancer will require surgery, radiotherapy, certainly for any curative treatments, and then chemotherapy. So certainly those people need to be involved in most MDTs. Physician, so someone such as a respiratory physician for lung cancer, or a gastroenterologist for bowel cancer. We certainly need a pathologist. I think earlier on you heard from Wong about mutational analysis, and you can see how important the input of a pathologist is in management of any cancer, basically. And the same really goes for a radiologist, because we need to be able to look at the scans and have an expert opinion, someone with a particular interest in that type of disease. They can give a real insight into how to manage that patient, okay? Really very vital to MDT working as specialist nurses. And I think, again, back in the sort of 1990s, specialist nurses were really few and far between. And I hope that most of you now should have access to a specialist nurse, because they can provide, obviously, support for the patient. But in the situation of an MDT, they know about the patient. They've often met the patient. Hopefully the doctor has as well at this point. But they often know the details that sometimes can blend into the background when we're too busy looking at the pathology and the scans. Actually what's important is what that patient wants, and their social circumstances, and their fitness, okay? So they have a really important role. Sometimes in some MDTs, palliative care specialists are really helpful, and then you may have other health professionals like dietitians or speech and language therapists. So to make an MDT run well, so what an MDT is basically a group of people that meet together to discuss and manage patients with cancer. And the way that is done is by having usually a weekly meeting. And the meeting may be done in person, which is better, I think, or sometimes it can be done by video conference, and that can be helpful, particularly for rarer tumours like GIST, where specialists may not be in that close proximity to each other. Or in places where, in rural places, like Scotland, mid Wales, where patients and clinicians are at quite distance from each other. So that's not a problem, it can work quite well. It's really important to have a good coordinator for these meetings though, because if we haven't got the right information, we haven't got the images to view, the pathology, everything really at the fingertips, then it's quite difficult to come to a proper decision about anything. So the MDT coordinator is a really important role. Most MDTs need to have a chair, and basically that's someone to, when people start digressing or arguing or debating an issue, sometimes we need a chair to actually say, well, come on, let's make a consensus decision here. Because sometimes things in medicine, as I'm sure you know, are not straightforward, and there's not always one answer. We need to come to a consensus. So really the role of the MDT chair is to provide that. The other thing that we find is that sometimes when you have meetings, people are away. And it can mean that meetings can be a little bit frustrating if someone who really is at the core of making a decision about surgery isn't there. So it's quite important that we have cross-cover for these type of meetings and at the appropriate level of expertise and specialisation. So all of these are things which are absolutely necessary for a good meeting, basically. So in the meetings, what happens? Well, hopefully the clinical background of each individual patient is discussed, and that includes looking at the available investigations, and hopefully having a specialist radiologist to look at them, often provide a second opinion. They may well have been seen and reported elsewhere, or, by a different radiologist, but sometimes having them reviewed in an MDT can give extra information. Where it's important, for the doctor or nurse who's met the patient most recently is to talk about the current symptoms, because that really will affect the treatment plan. So, as I said already, it's really vital that when patients are discussing MDTs, they're not just faceless names, but the person who's met the patient is there and telling us the details that we need to know to make a decision. So a consensus decision is usually met about the best treatment plan, and then that is something which is discussed and documented in the MDT, and data from about the patient is collated, and then that's all very nice, and that in a way is an exercise if it's not then acted on. So really what the main function of the MDT then is to provide that treatment in a sort of rapid, sensible way, making sure that the patient has all the information to hand, is given the options for treatment, and given all the information that they require to make a decision about what they want for them. So we can certainly sit in an MDT, talk about a patient and come to a decision that, say, for example, surgery is the right way forward. But sometimes when that decision is taken back to the patient, it might not be what they want. And that's fine. But until you have the opportunity to discuss that with the patient, sometimes it doesn't become apparent. So although MDTs, make decisions, it's not always, it's certainly not absolute. When we go back and meet the patient again, sometimes these decisions change, and that's absolutely fine. The other good reason to have an MDT is that by bringing together specialists with an interest in a particular tumour type, clinical trials can be more sort of discussed at that sort of stage, and hopefully it means that the patients can be offered entry into clinical trials more often than if we didn't work together in this way. So what are the potential benefits of multidisciplinary team working? Well, there's quite a few actually. So one of the aims is that we can work together to provide a practice which is based on evidence. So what we didn't want to do, and certainly may have happened in the past, is have individual people treating patients in different ways across the country, not always based on the most up-to-date evidence. But I think by bringing people together, we have to talk through and justify our decisions much more, and so that means that our practice hopefully is much more evidence-based. Certainly MDT working has improved communication between specialists, because I think if you have to sit in the same room and talk to someone for an hour every week, then really you can't avoid but communicate with them. So, I think it really has helped in that way. Whereas before, maybe people would be a bit nervous about ringing up professor, whoever, in case they're a bit scary. But I think if you have to meet them every week in a meeting, it's much easier. Communication between disciplines. So again, in the past, years ago, that you'd have surgeons working in one part of the hospital, oncologists in another. They may not actually talk to each other very much. The surgeons didn't believe in chemotherapy. The oncologists didn't really believe in surgery. And so, if they don't get together, then patients weren't offered both treatments, which actually is the best thing. So I think, I was joking slightly about that, but I think that it has helped for putting people together in close vicinity, just talking and looking at the evidence has really helped improving the treatments that we're offering patients. And again, communication again, but basically communications between the different hospitals, the different levels of care. So sometimes with things like GIST, you may be seen in your local hospital or your district general hospital, which is sometimes called secondary care. But you may need to go for treatment in a regional hospital, or sometimes called a tertiary centre. So again, what MDT working has done is helped communication between those sort of levels of care, and also between primary care, which is your GP. It's quite important. One of the functions of MDTs is to make sure the GP is informed about any decisions that are made. So hopefully it's actually improved communication between those different levels. Education, well, certainly, I think most people who go to MDTs feel that when they do, most weeks you come away having learned something from your colleagues. So I think it has improved general educational levels among most consultants, to be honest. Innovation, well, I think we've already heard about a pretty innovative clinic today with the Pause GIST clinic, which sounds like a fantastic example of MDT working, actually, I have to say. But I think, again, if you're putting people together with a particular interest, they're much more likely to think in an innovative manner and come up with new ideas, and that's definitely the case again. Audit. So one big improvement we've seen with MDT working is data collection. And it sounds boring, but basically, up until MDT working was standard, then every individual hospital may have some figures that they can look at, but it was much more difficult to get up-to-date, accurate figures about treatments that patients are receiving, numbers of patients receiving different treatments or different cancers, and now that's all collected in every meeting, and hopefully it means that audits and looking at numbers and research is much easier to do than it used to be. So clinical governance covers a big area, but basically what MDT working has helped us use evidence-based. All of these things mean that our practice is more up to date. We're able to look at our figures, look at our outcomes, which hopefully means that the quality of care for patients improves. I've already briefly mentioned clinical trial activity, and I think that, again, MDT working helps to recruit patients into trials and to give patients information about trials, because, again, if you've got a group of specialists working together, they're much more likely to be aware of the current and up-to-date trials that are available, and therefore that means that the patients are more likely to be told about them. So hopefully MDT working helps with that too. So the other thing is, the main thing really, is that what we want to do is provide the best care with the most appropriate treatments quickly. So what we want to do is, from diagnosis through to having a treatment, to be as quick as possible and smooth. And I think that working in this way has helped with that, because people really need to take ownership of moving the patient quickly through the different pathway. It is actually surprising, but slightly frustrating. But for a patient to go through from, for example, being diagnosed with esophageal cancer, they will need multiple tests before they even get to having any treatment, including an endoscopy, a CT scan, a PET scan, biopsy, an endoscopic ultrasound. So that's already 4 or 5 tests which take time to organise. And I think expecting us to get a patient through that type of treatment without working together is impossible. I can't imagine a time when we didn't work like this, to be honest. So overall, what the main benefit is that we provide seamless care for the patient. Obviously, there are benefits to team members, mainly educational ones, but also support for decision making. You can imagine it can be quite difficult sometimes with very difficult decisions. It's very good to have the support of your colleagues and to talk about cases. It's almost like having a second opinion, to be able to talk through cases where the decisions are difficult. So when we can come and take that back to the patient, we feel that we're providing them with with the best information, and sometimes with several people's opinions that they can then take away. And I think it has led to improved job satisfaction among oncologists and other medics and also specialist nurses. So there is in fact some evidence to show that. So most importantly at the end of this is really the patient experience. And I think that MDT working has led to an improved quality of care, a quicker, more efficient pathway through from diagnosis through to treatment, and much less variation in care across the UK. So, I think now that we work like this, it's much more unusual for a patient who lives in a rural area not to be offered specialist treatment, and I think that wouldn't happen these days because of MDT working. And hopefully it means that patients have access to all potential options for treatment, and also easy access to specialist opinions or highly specialised opinions, particularly in rarer cancers like GIST. So coming back to how the MDT works, one of the sort of catchphrases that we hear in medicine quite a lot is patient-centred care. And what that basically means is, we may end up with decisions about patients' treatments which are irrelevant to the patient if we don't know the important facts about that person. So within the MDT and within MDT working, as I've mentioned already, it's absolutely vital, it's a particular bugbear of mine, is that the patient should be presented by someone who's actually met them. And it almost sounds ridiculous, but if you go to an MDT, for example, in breast cancer, where there's a lot of new cases every week, it can be difficult sometimes when, if one of the surgeons is away, there may be a number of cases when no one's met the patient. Well, how can you possibly make a decision, in that situation? So obviously the patient's views and preferences and needs are absolutely vitally important. And I think the way this has now moved on is that we have key workers, we have specialist nurses usually, who a very big, important role of theirs is to make sure that the patient's preferences, the patient's views are paramount and are basically presented in that meeting before any decisions are made. So it might be that someone's a carer for their elderly relative and they don't want to have daily radiotherapy, which is going to mean that they have to travel 30 miles a day for that. It's not possible for them, and that's absolutely vital information to know, when deciding what the best treatment is. So I think the way that MDT working has moved on more recently is really with making sure that the care is very much patient-centred. And then the second thing with this is really patient information. I've seen that you've already had some patient information booklets today, and I think that's, again, something which is absolutely essential to be addressed in MDT. So there's no point in making a decision about a treatment if we aren't then able to go back and communicate that decision to the person who is facing it, and also give them the information they need about the treatment options to enable them to make a well-informed choice. Sometimes, quite often in any cancer, there's more than one option. Patients, for example, in esophageal cancer may be offered surgery or radiotherapy, and they're very different treatments, really. So this was just to show how an MDT works. So you've got imaging and pathology that's going to be reviewed by the clinicians there. We've got data collection, which is going to be immediately put onto a database, hopefully, and then cancer expertise with all the available clinicians and specialist nurses, pathologists, etc. And it means that we can provide quality treatment planning and deliver that. There are a few negative things. In the top corner there, all of this takes time, it takes money, because it takes money in terms of staff costs, in terms of travelling, in terms of facilities. So none of this is cheap, but I think that it's probably well worth it, any additional cost, to make sure that we're providing the best treatments. Is there any evidence for all of this? It's quite difficult actually to look back, and because this is something which has happened, it's quite hard to, there's no way you could do a trial to compare them. What we could do is look back and see how things were before MDTs and after, and that has been done. We could look at patients' management, their survival and outcomes, and see if there's been an improvement. We could look at patient information, and we could look at patient feedback. And some of this has been done, but I have to say that basically the evidence for outcomes is relatively poor. There's not much data out there. I think it's just because research in this area is quite difficult and it's very susceptible to bias, because over the time that MDT working has been brought in, lots of things have changed in terms of treatments and staging and things, so it's quite hard to compare. But there is increasing data out there, and I was going to show you a couple of local examples. So this is the Upper GI MDT in South Wales, where we do also discuss GIST patients. It first began back in sort of 2000, and this is one of the first meetings. Prior to that, patients were treated by general surgeons, okay? So what they looked at was patients who had esophageal cancer and those who had surgery, curative surgery. They looked at patients who had that type of operation before the MDT existed and those after the MDT existed. So that was 54 patients before and after. So before the MDT existed, 6 different surgeons operated on that 50 patients. But once the MDT existed, only 2 surgeons did it. So they were operating on higher numbers of patients for this type of specialised surgery. Interestingly, the number of anaesthetists was 14 before the MDT, and then only 1 operated on all of them afterwards. So that's quite a big change. And the type of treatment they received, before the MDT, nobody had any neoadjuvant chemotherapy, which is now standard, whereas 26 of them did afterwards. That's probably related to change in practice, to be honest, though. Anyway, the data that Wynne Lewis from South Wales has published basically showed a much reduced operative mortality, going from 26% down to 6%. So that's a big change with MDT, just purely from having an MDT. The open and close rate, an open and close operation is where patient goes for a surgery, it's not possible to operate at the time, so that's something we really try and avoid if possible. And that reduced from 21 down to 13% for laparotomy. So again, a big improvement. And survival, I have to say I can't quite believe the results of this, but this is what's been published. 5-year survival was 10%, which is very poor in the control group, but up to 52% in the post-MDT group. So there does seem to be a very significant improvement just with MDT working. I mean, there were other changes that went on during this time with new treatments and things, so it's not all just that, but I think that certainly it does reflect better practice. And that's just a survival graph to show that. Another quick example was looking at an area in South Wales, Merthyr, which is basically an area which is known to have a high level of deprivation. It's a high, compared to the rest of Wales, there's a high level of unemployment and long-term illness, and these are reflected in these figures here. And this thing at the bottom, the Townsend deprivation score, is just a scoring system that's used to look at deprivation in different areas. So, again, an MDT was set up for colorectal cancer in this case, and what it basically showed is a significant reduction in emergency surgery, a reduction in the requirement for permanent stomas, which again is a reflection of good surgery, a reduction in operative mortality, and a marked increase in people having oncology treatment. So I do think that again in this situation it appears to reflect a big improvement just for the fact of getting people together and working as a team in this situation. So these are very old figures, and I think things have moved on quite a lot since then, but it does reflect the way that things have changed. So pros and cons, I mean certainly I've talked really so far about the benefits to MDT working, but I think that one thing to say is that there are a few cons for MDT working. One thing that particularly can be a problem is that it can delay action. So sometimes if a patient is on the ward and nothing happens to that patient for several days because it's written in the notes, awaiting MDT, awaiting MDT meeting. I mean, that's incredibly frustrating and shouldn't happen. But basically, sometimes it's easier just to pick up the phone and speak to somebody. So these are sort of small things that can be avoided if people are sensible. We've already touched on the fact that if there's a lack of information available in the MDT, the wrong decision is made, and that has been shown in some studies that have looked at decisions made in the MDT and whether they're actually acted on. And there is some non-concordance, meaning that not all decisions made in the MDT are the ones that are actually then carried through. Occasionally there can be difficult team members. So that can mean somebody who's particularly opinionated or doesn't listen to others and that sort of thing. And that can happen, but again I think if you have a good MDT chair, then there's ways of getting around that. But occasionally it can be difficult. There can be disagreement, and certainly that's quite healthy. But now and again, people just cannot agree about the right thing to do. So in that situation, obviously, there may be more than one right answer, and I think that as long as that's recorded, and that is what is reflected when the patient is told the options, that's not wrong. And obviously resource intensive, well that basically means expensive. And certainly there is quite a bit of money required to run a good MDT. Oops. So, at this point I wanted to show you just a couple of short clips from an MDT. I've got a DVD for this that was produced by NCAT, which is the National Cancer Action Team. What they did is they, sorry, I'll just load it while I'm talking. They actually went out and filmed some MDTs in action, and these are actors on this DVD, but
excuse me, I'm not sure you're going to get any sound after that.
Okay.
Because I wasn't lined up to...
We'll see, shall we?
You'll get a couple of squeaky speakers actually in the laptop, that's all.
Okay.
Can they turn that to maximum?
It might be okay.
Just put the mic closer to the laptop.
Okay.
Yeah,
We'll have a go, and if technology fails, that's all right. We'll do without it. Anyway, so what they did is they filmed the MDTs, and then they had actors act out. So what you see is not actually the actual people, but actors in their places. And the idea was to just give something that we could send back to MDTs to watch, to stimulate some discussion and help us to look at our own MDT function. But I think in this situation it's just useful for you to be able to see how things work sometimes. So, let's have a go.
The MDT is very well planned. The coordinator is very good. So we all know beforehand who's going to be discussed. There is a program. So she ensures we have all the radiology, pathology, all the clinical notes are there, and a computer set up for recording the pro forma. So the meeting runs really well, and the function of the coordinator has been crucial.
The pathologists and radiologists probably spend as much time preparing for the MDT as doing it, because they have to review the slides and the images and be able to say, well, actually, you have to take this into account.
Sometimes not all of the information in terms of scans and histology are available. There are some patients that are discussed, and management plan cannot be decided there and then because not all of the results have come through.
This patient is Wesley Hart.
Wesley Hart, Kate Hallett and David Quinn are not ready, I'm afraid.
I don't have any time allocated to prepare. I do 5 APMs a week, so that's a big chunk of my time.
They'll be going on to next week.
Yep. Will they be ready next week?
I don't know.
It's important to have somebody in the meeting who knows that patient, so we know their social circumstances and comorbidity. But we also need the notes there, because we often need to look up other information. So what's the history? Where are you with this patient?
I haven't got the notes. I haven't got any data on him apart from this PET scan and a couple of letters.
I've been to MDTs where the quality of pre-meeting review has been poor. There have been a lot of people sitting around waiting while someone hurriedly tries to come up with an answer at the meeting, and that's not helpful to anyone.
The PET scan showed us something different. I'll tell you what it is, and you can look it up on the spectroscope and the CT scan to tell us what it is. Yeah?
It puts the person doing the review under stress, so you're not entirely trusting their judgment because they made an impression, and so it's a waste of everyone's time.
We can't make a sensible decision if we're trying to work out the history from the imaging. Yes, but we'll make the wrong decision.
Trying to speed up the process of getting patients through does mean thinking ahead and planning a bit.
So that basically shows us the type of problems that we can face if the information's not there. So I think you can see how frustrating it can be if these MDTs are not run properly. So can you hear that at the back? Is it completely? Okay. There's quite a few different sections, but I was going to just pick out a couple to give you an idea of how things work. Is it useful to see this? Yeah? Okay. So the next bit is about clinical decision making. I thought I would show that one, and one about patient-centred care. I mean, there's lots of different sections. What in the introduction to this, which I haven't shown, and I should have said really, is all the names have been changed, and they're actors, as I said. And what they quite clearly say is this is not a reflection of the best practice, but is a reflection of true practice. And this is reality. And I think that the idea for this DVD is that we all, as MDT members, learn from it and hopefully look at our own practice and make changes to improve the situation. So we'll move on to the next bit, which hopefully is a bit better. Clinical decision making.
We have a representation of all the different clinicians Mrs. Nora Adams. She's a 66-year-old lady who was diagnosed with a malignant stricture of the transverse colon at bowel cancer screening. The biopsy has confirmed carcinoma of the transverse colon. I think a lot of the success of the MDT depends on the atmosphere within the MDT. Behaviours are key, such as respecting each other and listening to each other. And she's had a staging CT scan.
So here we have a distal transverse colon, a tumour that is about 9 centimetres in length, quite aggressive looking. If you have one person who thinks their view is right and they're really not bothered what other people think, you won't actually get the right answer for the patient.
I particularly like our bowel team. It's an MDT where everybody's voice is heard and everybody's contribution is valued.
Do you think maybe she could be entered into the Foxtrot trial?
Actually, we raised this issue the other day, and possibly yes. She isn't terribly symptomatic.
Probably the thing that we do best is to have fairly balanced discussion with reasons and agreement at the end of it of the optimum management.
So yeah, it would certainly be worth raising with that there's nothing to lose in doing so.
She would be a good candidate for it. Age, no comorbidities, and a significant lesion.
We do all learn from each other and we throw ideas in. And it's understood that you don't shoot down other people's ideas in flames. I mean, you might disagree, and often we do disagree on various aspects of things, but we come to a consensus and say that this is what the team agrees is the best way forward for the patient.
So, John, recommendation is surgery and consideration for the Foxtrot trial. And if she is interested, we would be pleased to see her.
That's a bit better, isn't it? So I think everyone's listening to each other there, and you know, I think people knew about the patient, they knew about what the patient potentially wanted, and that's a much better example of how things work. And I think one of the things there is the chairperson, the man with the beard. He sort of facilitated that a bit more. So actually, you know, one of the roles of the chair is to make sure that the meeting moves on in that way. I was just going to show one other section, which is about patient-centred care, which I've already touched on, which I hope is a bit, you know, again, quite relevant. And then I think we probably had enough of the DVD. A second.
If the consultant whose patient we are discussing is not there, pick up the notes and do it on the hoof. I think that's a potential problem. Is there any family history in there?
She may have had a family or decided she doesn't want any more, given that she has an IUCD in place.
But obviously you need to ask her.
Maybe that needs to be discussed with her.
I ensure that my patients are put on the meeting list in a very timely manner, and that I usually have a good resume of what's going on with the patient in the wider context. Mr. Leslie Rowland, he's a 62-year-old man with a history of changing bowel habit. I think one major part of our role is to alert teams to the psychosocial concerns of the patient. And I'm also able to represent the patient's wishes and to advocate for them. Some of the things that are very important are those very personal, social things that can actually change your plan.
Mr. Nathan Jackson is an 83-year-old man. He's reasonably well in himself, but quite frail, and is the carer of his wife, who is very disabled and spends all of his time looking after her.
It's important to be equipped with these bits of information.
We put the disease in the context of the patient. This isn't a theoretical exercise for us.
He also suffers from sleep apnea.
I'm going to be seeing some of these patients in the clinic tomorrow. So I think we're very much focused on these are real people and we're planning their care. This is about their lives.
So I think you can see from that basically there are good and bad MDTs, but also how important it is that, as I said several times, basically the patient being discussed, all of the information is there, not just the technical information. So what I've just summarised on this slide is really what makes a good MDT. I think from those short videos we can see that good leadership is pretty important. Obviously good attendance by the core members of the team, and engagement and mutual respect between the members of the team. You know, we need to listen to each other, and that's fine to disagree, but you know, I think as long as everyone's treated with respect, basically. And that leads to good team working, which hopefully means the meeting functions well, and the right outcomes are made for that patient. We certainly need time for these MDTs, and sometimes they are squeezed in a bit in the morning, you know, 8 till 9 or lunchtime, and that's okay. But as long as they're not sort of squashed in between people's clinics when they can never get to them, which can be a problem. And I think we need the infrastructure, so you know, we need all the IT facilities to look at the different scans from different hospitals and all of those things. As long as that's in place, then these meetings can be very, very helpful indeed. Governance, so you know, we need to be able to look back at our data over the last year, for example, and look at our outcomes easily and make sure that we're getting the right outcomes and that we're happy with our results. Because if we don't do that, then you know, how do we know whether our treatments are being effective? This was just something which was recently published regarding MDT working, and it just basically summarises the things that are required. You know, very straightforward. We need a good team, we need infrastructure, we need good organisation of the meetings, and very much need patient-centred clinical decision-making, which we've already just heard about. So I think what I was going to say is that for GIST, MDT working is extremely important because it's such a rare tumour compared to things like breast cancer, that specialist input is absolutely vital. And again, it's difficult for rarer tumours because you know, depending on where you live, if you don't live very close to a big centre, it doesn't mean that you're not able to access specialist care. So the way that MDTs work for things like GIST varies a little bit across the country. In South Wales, for example, all our new patients and patients with GIST are discussed within the Upper GI MDT meeting, which is a regional meeting. And so I go to that, but also I have a colleague in radiology, a particular expert in GIST radiology. We have a pathologist with an interest, and we have access to mutational analysis. So I think for GIST, in some centres, obviously, it's incorporated within sarcoma MDTs, which again are usually regional because of the relative rarity of some of these tumour types. But it does mean then that patients with GIST, although you may have to travel to a more central centre to have the treatment, management can be across the board. You know, it doesn't matter where you live, you should be able to access quality specialist care. So I hope that's the way that you have found it. So, in summary, I think that, you know, in my opinion, and I think, you know, the evidence backs up to some extent, MDT working is already central to cancer care in the UK. That's already the way things have moved. I think it has revolutionised cancer care. And although there's not a huge amount of data to back that up, you know, for a sort of relatively new consultant like myself, I can't imagine working without MDT, you know, working, to be honest. I have no idea how it was done before. And really, it's all down to communication at the end of the day. And if you're actually meeting with people on a weekly basis, it's much easier to make a proper management plan for individual patients. So hopefully that picture really just shows how the pieces of the jigsaw fit together and things are much clearer in that situation. So, I don't know if anyone's got any questions. If anyone wanted to watch the rest of that DVD, because it's quite interesting, it is available online, so feel free to watch it. But otherwise, that was all I was going to say today.